Welcome back to 24/7 Strategic Profile. Tonight we are not just reporting on a news cycle, we are witnessing the autopsy of an era. On the morning of April 18th, 2026, at precisely 10:46 a.m., the world as we knew it, a world underwritten by the steel and nuclear fire of the United States Navy, shattered. What unfolded in the narrow, claustrophobic waters of the Persian Gulf over the last 24 hours is not a skirmish. It is not a diplomatic incident that can be smoothed over with back-channel negotiations or a calibrated show of force. It is the single most catastrophic loss of American naval supremacy in history. It is a moment that renders a century of maritime doctrine obsolete in a single afternoon. The USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered behemoth, the apex of Western engineering, carrying 90 of the world's most advanced strike aircraft and nearly 6,000 American souls, has been struck, catastrophically compromised, and confirmed lost. But the shock isn't just that the ship is gone, the shock is how it happened. This wasn't a fight against a rival superpower with a blue water navy. This was delivered by a nation, Iran, that Washington spent 40 years dismissing as a regional actor, manageable through sanctions, rhetoric, and economic isolation. The number you need to burn into your mind tonight is 1,500. 1,500 ballistic missiles launched in coordinated, overlapping waves. This wasn't a signal. This wasn't a calculated escalation meant to force a seat at the table. This was a mathematical execution. 1,500 missiles designed to find the finite limit of the most sophisticated air defense system ever built, and then to trample over it through the sheer, brutal logic of volume. As I record this, 6,000 sailors are missing in the waters of the Gulf. The silence coming from the Pentagon is the loudest thing in the world right now. It is the silence of an institution that has absorbed a shock for which no manual was ever written. In the White House, in the Situation Room, and in the classified bunkers of the National Security Council, the atmosphere is one of paralyzed disbelief. Tonight, we break down the reality that the mainstream media is too terrified to touch. How did 1,500 Sejjil missiles invalidate 80 years of American hegemony? What does this mean for the sailors on the ground? And most importantly, what does the world look like tomorrow, now that the invincible aircraft carrier has been revealed as a 100,000-ton liability? To understand the sinking of the Abraham Lincoln, we have to look past the smoke and fire and look at the physics of saturation. The Lincoln entered the Persian Gulf as part of a carrier strike group, CSG deployment designed as a deterrent. It was surrounded by a steel ring, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and Ticonderoga-class cruisers equipped with the Aegis combat system. This is the gold standard of naval defense. It uses the SPY-1 radar to track hundreds of targets simultaneously and fires SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors that can hit a bullet with another bullet in space. American naval doctrine has always assumed that this layered defense could handle any plausible threat. But Iran didn't play by the rules of the doctrine. They studied the engagement capacity of the Aegis system for 20 years and found its breaking point. The first wave, the depletion phase. At 03 hours, the first 500 missiles were launched. These were not Iran's best weapons. They were older, liquid-fueled systems, cheap, numerous, and noisy. Their goal was not to hit the carrier, but to force the American destroyers to shoot. In a high-intensity engagement, an Aegis ship can only track a certain number of targets before its processing bandwidth hits a ceiling. More importantly, its vertical launch system, VLS cells, are finite. Every SM-6 fired at a decoy missile is one less interceptor available for the real threat. The second wave, the kinetic overload. As the American magazines began to run dry, the second wave arrived. 1,000 Sejjil-2 ballistic missiles. This is where the math became terminal. The Sejjil-2 is a solid fuel beast with a range of 2,000 kilometers and a terminal velocity exceeding Mach 10. But it wasn't just speed. It was the MARV, maneuvering re-entry vehicle technology. Unlike a standard ballistic missile that follows a predictable arc-like path, The Sejjil 2's warhead can change direction during its final descent. For the Aegis computers, this creates a tracking lag. The interceptor is fired at where the missile should be, but the missile moves to where the interceptor isn't. The result was a total saturation of the defensive envelope. Even if the American ships had an 80% intercept rate, which is heroically high, the remaining 20% of 2,500 missiles is 300 warheads. No ship, no matter how many tons of reinforced steel it carries, can survive 300 impacts from half-ton high-explosive warheads. The Lincoln's CIWS, the Phalanx R2D2 guns, were screaming at 4,500 rounds per minute, but they were overwhelmed by the sheer geometry of the attack. They were being asked to defend against 360 degrees of incoming fire simultaneously. The physics won. The Abraham Lincoln didn't just take a hit, it was systematically dismantled by a storm of kinetic energy that exceeded its structural integrity. How did a nation under maximum pressure sanctions build a weapon that could sink a $13 billion ship? This is the question that haunts the intelligence community tonight. The answer lies in the Sejjil program, the most focused indigenous weapons development project in modern history. The Sejjil is not a Russian copy. It is not a Chinese export. It is the product of an Iranian strategic culture that realized very early on that they could never win a fair fight against the US Navy. So, they spent 20 years building an unfair one. The genius of the Sejjil 2 lies in three factors: mobility, readiness, and precision. 1. Solid fuel. Older missiles take hours to fuel, making them easy targets for American drones. The Sejjil uses solid fuel. It can be stored in a ready-to-fire state for years. It can be rolled out of a mountain tunnel on a mobile TEL, transporter erector launcher, fired in under 5 minutes, and disappeared before a satellite can even confirm the launch. 2. Indigenous C4ISR. Striking a moving ship 1,000 miles away requires real-time data. Iran didn't rely on Western GPS. They integrated their own constellation of imaging satellites with a network of dark vessels, civilian-looking fishing boats equipped with sophisticated radar and acoustic sensors. They built a kill web that Washington's electronic warfare units couldn't fully jam because it was too decentralized. 3. The cost curve. A Sejjil missile might cost $500,000 to $1 million to produce. An American SM-3 interceptor costs $15 million. To guarantee a kill, the U.S. has to fire 2 interceptors per missile. That is $30 million of American defense budget spent to stop $1 million of Iranian hardware. Iran realized they could bankrupt American defense long before they ran out of missiles. The Sejjil program is the ultimate expression of asymmetric will. It proves that a nation doesn't need to be a superpower to defeat one. It just needs to be more patient and more focused on its enemy's specific vulnerabilities. Inside the Beltway, the atmosphere is described as catatonic. For 80 years, the aircraft carrier was the unanswerable argument of American diplomacy. If a country defied Washington, a carrier was sent to its coast, and the defiance usually ended. Tonight, that argument has been answered. The administration faces an impossible trilemma. Option A, total war. Launch a massive retaliatory strike against Iran's mainland. But here is the problem. Iran's 1,500 missiles were only a fraction of their stockpile. Thousands more are hidden in missile cities deep underground. A strike on Iran would trigger the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil would vanish overnight. Gas prices would hit $20 a gallon. The global economy would enter a depression that makes 2008 look like a minor correction. Option B, the nuclear escalation. There are those in the Pentagon whispering about the nuclear option to restore deterrence. But this is a fantasy. Using a nuclear weapon against a non-nuclear state in 2026 would turn every single ally, from London to Tokyo, against the United States. It would mark the end of America as a moral or political leader on the world stage. Option C, the strategic retreat. This is the most bitter pill of all. admitting that the Gulf is no longer an American lake, withdrawing the remaining fleet to save what's left. But if Washington withdraws, what happens to the US dollar? What happens to the security guarantees given to Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Japan? The loss of the Abraham Lincoln isn't just a military defeat. It is a systemic shock. It has exposed that the US military is top-heavy. It has incredible, expensive tools that are too valuable to lose but too vulnerable to use. The National Security Council is realizing that their entire Indo-Pacific strategy, designed to counter China, was built on the same invincible carrier assumption that just burned to a crisp in the Persian Gulf. There is a civilizational lesson in this tragedy. Iran did not win last night because they have better engineers or more money. They won because they have a consistency of purpose that Western democracies, with their 4-year election cycles and shifting priorities, have struggled to maintain. For 40 years, the Islamic Republic was told they were on the wrong side of history. They were squeezed by sanctions that prevented their people from buying medicine and airplane parts. The West expected them to collapse. Instead, Iran turned inward. They realized that every component they couldn't buy was a component they had to learn to build. The sinking of the Lincoln is the graduation day for the Iranian defense industry. It validates a strategy of resistant defense. Meanwhile, the U.S. military-industrial complex has become a victim of its own success. It focused on gold-plated systems, ships that cost billions and take decades to build. When you lose a $13 billion carrier, you can't just go to a shipyard and get another one next month. It takes 10 years to replace a Nimitz-class ship. The 6,000 sailors on the Lincoln were the best-trained, most courageous personnel in history. They didn't fail. Their architecture failed them. They were placed in a 20th century box and asked to survive a 21st century storm. Their loss is a tragedy of institutional arrogance. The belief that because we were the best yesterday, we will automatically be the best today. As the sun rises over the debris field in the Gulf, the world looks fundamentally different. In Beijing, the PLA Navy is watching the high-definition footage of the Lincoln's final moments with grim satisfaction. Everything Iran did with the Sejjil, China can do 10 times over with the DF-21D and the DF-26 carrier killers. The message to Taiwan is clear. If the U.S. cannot protect its own flagship in the Gulf, how can it protect an island 100 miles off the Chinese coast? The umbrella of American protection has just been shown to have massive, gaping holes. In Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, the calculation is changing in real time. For decades, these states hosted U.S. bases in exchange for security. They are now realizing that the protector might actually be a magnet for destruction. We are about to see a massive pivot towards strategic neutrality in the Middle East. In Moscow, the validation of asymmetric warfare provides a blueprint for how to exhaust Western resources. The era of great power competition has entered a phase where the Goliath is no longer the favorite to win. We are entering the age of the drone and the missile. The aircraft carrier, the symbol of 1945, is joining the battleship in the Museum of History. It is a world where access denial is cheaper than force projection. It is a world where the cost of being a superpower has just become prohibitively high. The waters of the Persian Gulf are finally still. The fires have gone out. But the world will never be the same. The sinking of the USS Abraham Lincoln is the black swan event of our generation. It forces us to ask, what is power? Is it the size of your ship or the clarity of your strategy? Is it the strength of your economy or the resilience of your people? Washington now has to decide if it will double down on a failed doctrine or if it has the humility to reinvent itself for a world that no longer fears its shadow. What is your assessment? Is this the end of American global leadership, or can a superpower learn from its greatest failure? The comments section is open for a serious, strategic debate. We read every word. If you found value in this deep dive, hit the like button and subscribe. The world is moving fast, and we are here to make sure you aren't left behind in the smoke of the old world.